Hey guys, Ben Simpson here at Simpson Vlogs, and welcome to another Ben Simpson at Simpson Vlogs Explained video. So, for those of you who have not seen the Explained series in a while, well, welcome back, because it is back. And sit back, grab a snack, grab a drink, kick your feet up, most importantly, have fun, because this is an important one. This is all about nuclear meltdowns. What is it, what are they, and just how bad can it be? So then, for those who do not know what a nuclear meltdown is, it is basically where a nuclear power plant, or, it can only happen in a nuclear power plant. That's the only place where conditions are right. It's the only place we use nuclear energy in that sort of way for a meltdown that could even occur. So basically, what happens when the formally controlled operation of nuclear fission goes out of control and becomes a self-sustaining nuclear fission event. So what does that mean then? What is nuclear fission? What does out of control mean? What does in control mean? And again, how bad can it get for people? Well, we have a few events in modern history, unfortunately, where nuclear meltdowns have occurred. The three foremost events are Chernobyl. Of course, everyone knows about the Chernobyl disaster of 1986, and just how bad Chernobyl could have been is disastrous. I mean, you could have been talking about evacuating multiple countries, massive portions of both the Ukraine, Scandinavia, Russia, surrounding countries like Poland being uninhabitable. And that disaster, it to this day, if you watch the various documentaries on Chernobyl, the one done by Sky is brilliant. It's just absolutely amazing. The tone of it and everything's brilliant. It's a miracle how the world avoided absolute and utter disaster in Eastern Europe that day and that week. And the amount of lives it ended up costing and ruining is tremendous to this day. We also have the Fukushima power plant in Japan. After the 2011 earthquake, subsequent tsunami, the power plant blew up. Literally, it blew up. And how close Japan came to the whole country being uninhabitable, it cannot be mentioned enough. I mean, Japan lies on many tectonic plates. It can be hit by earthquakes, tsunamis, supervolcano eruptions. It's got 2 supervolcanoes that I'm aware of. And the fact that they put nuclear in the mix, I'm not saying they were asking for disaster, but disaster is very high up there of what can happen. And boy, did they come close in 2011. But one that isn't talked about enough, because of course it isn't, it's here in the West, is America's 3 Mile Island disaster of 1978 and 79. Okay, that is something I only learned about yesterday. Obviously this video comes out on Monday, so it's been 2-3 days since I watched the documentary on Netflix. It's called Meltdown. Watch it. Just mind blown. The events, the whole events of it was just, it had everything in it. It was prophetic, it was cover up, it was scandal, it was negligence, it was everything going on at that power plant at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. Wow. But yeah, we've had 3 massive disasters where meltdowns have occurred. We've got at one end, we've got one that was caused by negligence, 3 Mile Island, and they escaped. Huge disaster. We've got Chernobyl, huge disaster caused by negligence and cover-ups and poor technology. And then you've got Fukushima caused by natural disaster. So there's many causes to a meltdown. Okay, anything can go wrong. But the main paramounting factor to a meltdown is normally cooling. Okay? Obviously, when energy is produced, the whole reason we use any sort of fuel, whether we use oil, coal, or nuclear, in a power plant, is we're doing it to heat water, to turn it into steam, to then turn a turbine, to then create electricity. Okay, that's how it works. If you don't know that, I mean, did you go to school? Like that's how a power plant basically works. Okay, you know, you have fuel, heat, water, steam, turbine, power. Very simple. Obviously, it's not. It can be a lot more complicated than that. But in the basic thing, very simple. What we do with nuclear fission, remember, fusion is different. Fusion, you put stuff together. Fission, we break stuff apart. We take nuclear material. It's normally uranium. Is it 239? I think it's 239 uranium we use. Or we also use. There's another one. Can't remember what it is. There's another material, nuclear material we use. So you get uranium 239, and what we end up doing is we fire a. Is it a neutron? Yeah, we fire a neutron at it. It helps the already unstable material already break apart, release more neutrons into other uranium sticks, which release more neutrons, and every time it releases these, that's not a neutron, is it? What am I on? It's electrons. Sorry, electrons. We send these little electron particles. Every time it's releasing these electron particles, it's bursts of energy. When energy comes out, obviously you get heat. That's what he used the heat to heat the water, to make steam, to make the subsequent turbine turn for power. That's how fission works. Okay, so electrons, pew, into the uranium rod, which breaks out, fires more electrons into more uranium rods, and so on and so forth. Now, the way we stop this becoming uncontrolled and have it controlled is we have other rods in the way. These rods are normally lead. Normally have lead rods. The reason we have lead rods is this: the lead has, what is it? It has 3 slots. Basically, it can soak up the excess electrons to stop too much energy being released from these fission reactions, and that keeps the reactor under control, keeps it generating a safe amount of heat and power for the the stuff to happen, the energy to happen. But the problem can lie with 2 reasons. If the control rods don't work, if they're not down far enough, especially with Chernobyl, that's kind of what happened with Chernobyl. The rods stopped working. They couldn't get the rods down, and when they pulled all the rods up and then threw them down again, it caused superheating. Remember, these rods are also super hot. So if you stick them back into water at a really high temperature compared to the water thing, you're going to get a massive excess of steam. Boom, explosion. That's what happened at Chernobyl. Now, 3 Mile Island's meltdown's a bit different. They didn't mess around with the control rods. They messed around with the water system. Again, no water, super hot environment, explosion. Okay, now the difference between Chernobyl's and 3 Mile Island is, whilst their meltdowns again all consisted around heating, it was completely different. There was no huge, massive, super huge reactor blowing up explosion as there was at Chernobyl. The explosion was, I say small, it was relatively small. It kind of it only burned one core. There wasn't multiple cores all blowing up at once like in Chernobyl. So while Chernobyl's was a disaster, they can kind of get away with calling 3 Mile Islands a accident. But again, it's all about heat. There was way too much heat there, and what ended up happening is you had an out of control reaction. And this out of control reaction got to the point where they were 30 minutes away from Chernobyl or worse. That is how close they were to the whole state of Pennsylvania, all the way down potentially to Washington DC, the capital of the United States, and all the way up to New York, being uninhabitable. Massive areas of America's extremely necessary East Coast, that's where its finances are, it's where the core of its civilization is where its administration is. You're talking about a nation crippling accident. So you kind of get in the picture of what can happen with a meltdown. You can go very quickly from an accident to disaster to nation crippling. And the range of things that could happen. You're talking about biological disaster as well as a financial disaster, as well as just plain and simple ecological disaster. You know, people would die. Okay, if that much radiation got released that quickly into the environment, you're talking about everyone within probably about anyone within the 5 to 10 mile radius dead. They will die in 3 to 5 days. Horrible, gruesome deaths. Again, watch the Chernobyl documentary on Sky or wherever you can find it now. It is awful just how painful and just ruining radiation can be. And we're not talking about cancer, because cancer is whilst it is bad, that is definitely another thing that is a killer. You know, cancer, it's long term. You know, you don't get cancer straight away. Okay, it'll be a few years before the cancer starts to become a thing. A few more years before obviously it's diagnosed, depending on how aggressive the cancer is, and especially when back then, you know, their cancer diagnosis and stuff was nowhere near as good as now. And so it's a few years before you get to treatment, you know, before you actually know you have cancer. Acute radiation sickness is far worse. You know, hair falls out, skin starts breaking out in lesions and boils and ulcers. It's just complete utter cell degradation. You are literally being ripped apart at cellular level when you're exposed to ridiculous amounts of radiation. And the weekly average of radiation that you're as an on-site worker at a nuclear power plant is 0.3 rads, I think it's 0.3 a week. Anything above 2 is life-threatening. Like, you could get cancer. Anything above 10, finished. I mean, you are finished. You will definitely get a radiation sickness, and you will likely die within 10 years. Anything more than that, and you're looking at dying in a few days. A horrible, painful death, unfortunately. And that is what can happen with a meltdown. That is the worst that can happen, radiation sickness. Obviously, with an explosion, you're obviously talking about anyone on site being blown up by whatever, debris, nuclear blast, you know, that sort of stuff will also kill you, obviously. But yeah, that's the worst that can happen. In terms of the meltdown itself, well, like I said, out of control. And what normally ends up happening is through the process of fission. Sorry, I would have to say it right. Think about it. It's not fusion. It's fission. Fusion is what suns and stars do. Fission is what we do here on Earth. We can't do fusion yet. Trying to, but not yet. What ends up happening is that there are other factors that are produced from it, not just heat and electrons. You get other elements start getting produced in there as well. And the main factor in all these is with the heat and the out of control, and the element hydrogen gets produced. So hydrogen gas, very volatile, very explosive. And what ended up happening in Chernobyl and again in 3 Mile Island is a hydrogen bubble forms inside the core. So the core is where the fuel is and where the control rods are. A hydrogen bubble forms. Now, when there's a leak or you remove the control rods and you open up the core, oxygen gets in. Oxygen and hydrogen aren't the best of friends. Boom. That is what could happen. But not only that, is heat. Heat and hydrogen are certainly not the best of friends. As that reactor core is getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter because the bloody reaction is completely out of control. There's way too much heat. There's not enough control rods stopping the electrons, both or one or the other. As it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter because this excess energy's got nowhere to go. There's no water it's going to. It's just getting hotter and hotter and hotter. You get to the point of explosion. Okay, it gets completely out of control. You get explosion. That is what a meltdown is. It is an absolute and utter disaster. We call it a meltdown because the core itself starts to physically melt. It is at such a high temperature. The fuel inside of it is degrading so fast and so rapidly, it is literally melting down. Okay, when you go to look at, when they looked at the 3 Mile Island one, because you can't really look at Chernobyl's, that is a disaster. You can't go anywhere near that. Still to this day, there is a pile of radioactive meltdown material that you can't go anywhere near. You will get cancer or acute radiation sickness. That is extremely dangerous. They call it the elephant foot because it looks like an giant elephant's foot. That's how bad it's melted through. Now, with 3 Mile Island again, it's the most recent one. It's not as much as a devastation one. One you can really talk about is they sent a camera into the car to see the damage after the accident. And you can see how the sides of the car is all melted in on itself, and it's just terrible. Now, there's a word that you use for when the physical reactor itself melts, or the thing housing the core melts. The core melting is called a meltdown. When you have the reactor meltdown, in the West we call it the China syndrome. Now, it's nothing racist or anything. It is literally an analogy for saying that the radioactive material could get to the point where it melts through the reactor, underneath it, to the earth, melt all the way through to China, to the other side of the planet. America, China, you got them on either sides of the globe. It will melt through all the way to China. Now, obviously, it wouldn't. That's not possible. But at the time, a movie had come out called the China syndrome, and that is what the theory was, and that's what it was called, China syndrome, when it melts through the bottom into the ground. Now, that is obviously a disaster on an ecological level, because once you start getting radioactive material into the soil, into the water, contaminating an entire biosystem. The whole area now is under threat of radiation. Being in food, in the water, in the animals. And at 3 Mile Island, there were certainly signs of such a thing. The fish ended up dying in the subsequent rivers surrounding the island, and it was bad. So then, what can we surmise from what a meltdown is? Alright, that's what this video is about. We got a bit off on tangents and some points, obviously, as I always do, but I'm sure you guys enjoy it. So, if you did enjoy it, obviously like, comment, subscribe down below, and hit that bell notification to keep up to date with more explained videos as well as everything here, some vlogs. But then, to summarize, a meltdown. You have radioactive material. It gets out of control, whether that be because the control rods, the lead stuff that's not there to soak up the excess electrons to control the fission reaction, or whether that be the water isn't there to keep the reactor cool. Either way, the core gets extremely hot to the point it literally melts because it's that far out of control. The material is degrading so fast, because that's what a radioactive is. It's an unstable element, which the uranium is an entire material of unstable element, literally breaking down. That's what radioactivity is. It's an element breaking down. So when that happens, it literally melts, and it gets to the point where it's so hot it starts producing other elements, because when an element breaks down, it breaks down into other elements to the point where hydrogen is produced, and you get the explosion. Okay, that's what a nuclear reactor meltdown looks like. The physical material fuel they use, the nuclear fuel they use, or radioactive fuel, sorry, that they use, melts. You get the hydrogen, you get the boom, and you have a disaster on your hands pretty quick. And what can happen from that is everything from immediate area being uninhabitable to a massive area statewide / countrywide being uninhabitable, to millions to thousands to millions of deaths, massive cancer obviously throughout the population in the surrounding areas and otherwise, as well as acute radiation sickness. None of things you want to ever happen. So that is what can pretty happen with nuclear fuel. Nuclear fuel is better for the environment when it works. Obviously, we're not producing, the CO2 and everything that oil and coal power plants produce. But when oil and coal power plants have a problem, they just blow up. Okay, you got fires, they blow up. It's bad, but you can fix that. When radiation from a nuclear power plant goes up in flames, you're talking a disaster that can have lasting effects for centuries to come. Literal centuries, hundreds of years. Chernobyl's immediate surrounding area, the town, the city, is uninhabitable for the next 100 years. So whilst we do need greener energy, we need to make sure it's safe, and there's been too many times already in our history where we've cut corners for money and for necessity, and it's come back to bite us in the ass. So this has been me, Ben Simpson, here on Simpson Vlogs, explaining to you guys what a nuclear meltdown looks like, what it is, what its effects are, and just how bad are they. I hope you've understood that. Of course, if you did, run it back again and try to understand. Until next time, guys, I'm going to love you and leave you. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe down below. Hit that bell notification to keep up to date with everything here on Simpson Vlogs. And, of course, check out links in the description. There's TikTok, Instagram, Rizzle, and Twitter. Alongside Simpson Plays and SimpsonPlays.com. Until next time, folks, the next video is going to be all about 3 Mile Island. So if you haven't seen the documentary, go watch it, because obviously I'm not going to go into absolutely everything the bloody documentary did. 4 episodes that were an hour long, I believe. But yeah, I'm going to tell you all about the disaster most of us don't know about, unless you're from the United States, especially from Pennsylvania. So until next time, guys, peace.